A quiet farmer saves a stranger from drowning, but has no idea she's a runaway millionaire who will soon change his life. Subscribe for more. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The storm had moved in faster than the forecast predicted, but Laura Whitman hadn't paid much attention to the weather. She wasn't thinking about anything really, except the overwhelming need to get away from everything that had, until just a few hours ago, defined her entire existence. The tires of her luxury SUV hummed over the slick asphalt, the dashboard glowing softly in the dusk. Rain tapped against the windshield in a steady rhythm, matching the storm she carried inside her. Just that morning, she'd stood in front of a mirror in her penthouse apartment, slipping on a designer gown tailored for the Whitman-Blake engagement gala. The event, orchestrated down to the last canapé, was meant to be the crowning jewel of her public image. A woman who had it all: the company, the vision, the fiancé, the future. Every major outlet was covering the story, every business journal speculating on the financial potential of the merger between Whitman Organics and Blake Media. She had smiled for the cameras, nodded politely at board members, lifted her champagne glass in choreographed grace, but everything had unraveled in the space of a few overheard sentences. She had gone looking for Richard. One of the catering staff had mentioned he'd slipped into the study, and Laura had thought he might want a moment alone before the toast. She pushed the door open quietly, not intending to eavesdrop. What she heard stopped her in place. Richard's voice, smooth, confident, was unmistakable. "Once the deal is done, Whitman Organics is ours in practice. Laura's brilliant, yes, but far too sentimental for business. She'll give me signing rights within the year. She trusts me." There was laughter. Another voice, one she didn't recognize. "So the wedding's a formality? She's the key. The rest will fall in place." Laura hadn't entered. She had backed away, eyes burning, heart cracking open in a silence too clean to be noticed by anyone. No confrontation, no grand scene. Just a quiet retreat down the hallway, past clinking glasses and meaningless compliments, out the grand double doors, across the rain-slick marble, and into her car. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she didn't look. She silenced it, turned off the GPS, and simply drove. The city fell behind her like a bad dream. She passed through smaller towns, anonymous gas stations, with flickering neon, endless stretches of darkening road. Her thoughts were a blur of betrayal and disbelief. Richard's voice kept repeating in her head. Not just the words, but the tone, that calm, calculated confidence. She had given him trust, access, her name. She had believed in what they were building together, and all along it had been a transaction. The rain turned heavy, sheets of water blurring the road until the world beyond her headlights ceased to exist. She didn't recognize the signs anymore. The route had narrowed into winding lanes that curved through low hills and patches of forest. It was late now. The dashboard clock glowed with a time that made no sense to her anymore. She just knew she needed to be further away. The road dipped unexpectedly, and water splashed under the tires. It had pooled deep and fast across the pavement. She slowed, but the rain obscured everything. The car shuddered, then stalled midstream. Laura gripped the wheel. She tried the ignition, nothing. The engine clicked once, then fell silent. The current tugged gently at the wheels, a whisper of something far more dangerous just beneath the surface. Her breath caught. She tried the door. Stuck. The water was rising around her legs, soaking the hem of her dress. Panic surged. She pushed harder. Still nothing. Outside, the forest was silent, except for the roar of rain and the rushing current. The headlights dimmed. A strange stillness filled the cabin, the kind that comes just before fear explodes into motion. Then movement. A figure approached through the storm, tall and broad-shouldered, machete in hand. Laura froze, unsure whether to scream or hope. He came straight for the window, squinting through the glass. Rain poured off the brim of his hooded jacket. He lifted the machete and struck not wildly, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to shatter glass without harm. The side window broke inward, and the man reached through. "Take my hand," he said, voice steady over the rain. Laura didn't move at first. "Now," he commanded. "This car won't last another minute." She obeyed. His grip was strong, firm. He pulled her through the window with practiced ease, lifting her out into the storm. Her feet hit the water, then slipped. She fell against him, gasping. He didn't speak again. He just turned and carried her, chest heaving, muscles straining against the flood. The current tugged at their legs, but he moved with determination, like he'd done this before. Trees loomed on either side. Branches clawed at them. The water churned louder behind. Up a slight incline, away from the river's reach, they reached a cabin tucked behind a thicket. It looked like something out of another era, wooden, weather-beaten, isolated. He opened the door with his elbow and brought her inside. Warmth greeted them in a rushed dim light, the crackle of a dying fire, the scent of wood smoke and damp wool. He set her down on a thick rug and turned to shut the door. She coughed, shivering. "I'll get you something dry," he said, already disappearing into another room. Laura sat in stunned silence. The adrenaline had left her empty. Her hands shook as she brushed wet hair from her eyes. Her dress clung to her body, heavy and ruined. Rain still pounded the roof like war drums. He returned with a bundle of folded clothes. "They're my sisters," he said, laying them beside her. "Not fancy, but they're clean and dry." She nodded. "Thank you." He gestured toward a curtain strung across the corner of the room. "You can change there." Laura gathered the clothes and slipped behind the curtain. Her fingers fumbled at the buttons. Her movements were slow, unsure. She slipped into a flannel shirt and soft cotton pants that hung loosely on her frame. When she emerged, he had started a fire in the hearth. Flames flickered, chasing shadows from the room. He glanced up. "Better?" "Yes, much better." He handed her a mug of steaming tea. She took it gratefully. The warmth seeped into her fingers. "I'm Zach," he said simply. "Zach Hayes." "Laura," she answered after a pause. "Just Laura." He nodded once, as if that was enough. They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds were the storm outside and the pop of burning wood. Laura studied the room. It was sparse but lived in. Books lined one wall. A faded map was pinned above a small desk. A pair of boots rested near the door. This wasn't a vacation home. This was someone's life. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do." "For how long?" He sipped his tea. "Long enough." Laura didn't press. She didn't want to. Not yet. Outside, the rain began to lighten, softening into a rhythm almost comforting. She leaned back against the couch, her body still trembling with cold and exhaustion. Zach rose and tossed another log into the fire. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "There's a spare room." "I don't want to impose." "You're not." He met her gaze. "You'd have drowned if I hadn't pulled you out. You're staying." Something in his tone brooked no argument. Laura nodded. She had no strength left to argue. He stood in the doorway of the guest room as she stepped inside. The bed was narrow but clean. A quilt lay folded at the end. The window overlooked the forest, dark and unreadable. "Good night, Laura." She turned to him, clutching the flannel collar around her throat. "Thank you," she said again. He hesitated, then nodded and stepped away. Alone, she sat on the bed. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She stared out the window into the blackness. She had no idea where she was, or what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She didn't know it yet, but her life had just begun. The sun came late to that part of Montana, rising shyly behind the mountains and filtering through the trees like a hesitant promise. Laura awoke slowly, her body stiff, the unfamiliar mattress groaning beneath her as she shifted. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was dim and plain, with rough-hewn wooden walls and a window barely curtained by a faded piece of fabric. The events of the previous night returned in a sudden rush rain, rising water, the crushing silence in the car, then the face of the man who'd pulled her out of it. Zach. She sat up, brushing tangled hair out of her eyes, feeling the soreness in her shoulders and legs. Her hands still bore faint red marks where she had gripped the car door and the edge of the shattered window. Beside the bed, neatly folded on a worn wooden chair, lay another set of clothes, a cotton skirt and a white blouse, both clearly worn, but immaculately clean. Laura hesitated only a moment before slipping out from beneath the blanket. The clothes were loose, but she felt oddly grateful for their simplicity. Gone were the tailored lines and subtle branding of her usual wardrobe. Everything about her now was stripped bare, from her feet to her name. The kitchen was already alive with the smell of something warm. When she stepped into the room, Zach was by the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pan. He didn't turn immediately, but seemed aware of her presence. On the small table sat 2 plates, mismatched but charming, and a pot of coffee that steamed softly in the quiet. "Morning," he said without looking over. "Good morning," she replied, unsure how to carry herself. He motioned to the table. "Hope you're hungry." She sat, glancing at the modest spread. Scrambled eggs, black beans, and freshly made tortillas. Her stomach growled before she could speak. Zach placed the pan down and joined her, silent for a moment as he poured them both coffee. Laura took a sip, the heat spreading through her chest. "This is really good," she said after a few bites, surprised by her own sincerity. "I cook what I can grow or raise," he replied. "Everything else I trade for." She nodded, chewing slowly. The food, while simple, was deeply satisfying in a way that unsettled her. There was something honest about it, about the man across from her, about the place, the silence. Nothing here was curated or staged. It just was. After breakfast, Zach pulled on a jacket and motioned toward the door. "Come with me." Laura followed him outside. The rain had left the landscape glistening, drops still clinging to leaves and grass. The river had receded slightly, but the earth remained soft and uncertain underfoot. She stepped carefully, following his lead past a garden bordered by crude fencing, where carrots, lettuce, and squash poked through damp soil. He handed her a wooden bucket. "You can start with eggs." She stared at it. "You mean from the chickens?" He didn't laugh, but the faintest smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That's usually where eggs come from." The chicken coop stood a few yards away, painted a peeling red. As she approached, the birds clucked in disapproval, flapping slightly at her unfamiliar presence. She hesitated at the door. "Just be firm," Zach called. "They won't hurt you. Much." Laura stepped in and immediately regretted it. The smell hit her first, then the noise, and finally the chaos of feathers and beady eyes. She knelt awkwardly, reaching beneath a squawking hen. Her hand trembled. The bird shifted, and she yelped, nearly toppling over. From outside, Zach watched with amusement, arms crossed over his chest. When she finally emerged with 3 slightly cracked eggs, mud on her knees and feathers in her hair, he offered no judgment, only a raised brow and a nod of approval. "Well done," he said. "You lived." Barely. By midday, Laura had learned to pump water from the old hand, well sweep the packed earth porch, and feed the goat whose name, inexplicably, was Clementine. Her arms ached. Her back was sore. But there was something else, something unfamiliar but exhilarating, swelling in her chest. Pride. She had done something real. They broke for lunch under the shade of an overgrown pine. Zach handed her a sandwich wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it, examining the humble contents. Cheese, tomato, something green and peppery. "I never thought a sandwich could taste this good," she said after the first bite. "That's because you're used to things made to impress, not to nourish." His words weren't accusatory, just factual. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the way the sunlight caught his profile, how his eyes scanned the horizon as if looking for something she couldn't see. "You said you used to be an architect," she ventured. He didn't answer right away. "A long time ago." "What changed?" A pause long enough to make her think he might not respond at all. "Everything." Later, while Zach repaired the gate near the barn, Laura explored the edges of the house. It was modest 3 rooms, if that, but thoughtfully laid out. Books lined a shelf beside a faded armchair. Maps and sketches hung on a corkboard in the corner of what appeared to be his workspace. She studied one closely, a detailed plan for a housing complex, labeled in neat professional script. The lines were beautiful, elegant in their simplicity. In the spare room, while tidying her borrowed things, she noticed a box beneath the bed. It was unmarked but slightly ajar. She hesitated only a second before reaching down and sliding it out. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a metal plaque. She pulled it free. The name engraved on it caught her breath. Miguel Hayes, National Award for Innovation in Sustainable Design. The air seemed to still. She was still holding the plaque when Zach's shadow fell across the doorway. "Put that back," he said quietly. She looked up, startled, guilt washing over her. "I didn't mean to pry." His expression darkened. "That man doesn't exist anymore." I remember the name," she said. "The New Light Project. It was all over the news." Zach's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, took the plaque from her gently, and returned it to the box. 12 people died," he said, voice flat. "One of them was my wife. Another was my daughter." Laura's knees weakened, and she sat heavily on the bed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. "I was cleared, legally, but that doesn't change anything." He closed the box. "It was my design, my responsibility. I trusted the wrong people." She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the weight of his grief pressed her back into silence. That night they said little over dinner. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Laura couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted not by her own betrayal now, but by his pain. In the morning, she rose early, determined to make herself useful. Zach was already in the field, assessing storm damage. She joined him without asking. They worked side by side, repairing a fallen fence, redirecting a stream of runoff. Her hands blistered. She didn't complain. They returned to the cabin late in the afternoon, covered in dirt and sweat. Zach poured them each a glass of well water, and for the first time they sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn orange and then violet. "This place, it's beautiful," Laura said quietly. "It wasn't at first," he replied. "It was just the only place I could go where no one knew my name." She looked at him, her face open. "Is it still the only reason you're here?" He met her gaze for a long moment. "No, not anymore." The next few days passed with quiet routine. They worked. They ate. They talked, sometimes. Laura grew stronger, more capable. Her movements lost their awkwardness. She began to anticipate what needed to be done, sometimes before Zach even asked. But the peace was fragile. It was broken when 2 men on motorcycles arrived. Laura was hanging laundry when the roar of engines echoed up the road. Zach stepped out, his body instantly alert. The men pulled up beside the gate and cut their engines. One of them held a photograph. "Looking for someone," he said. "She's gone missing. There's a reward." Zach glanced at Laura. Her face had gone pale. The man held up the photo. It was her in a white dress, smiling for the camera. Her engagement photo. She stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I haven't seen her." The men exchanged a look, handed her a card, and rode off without further questioning. When they were gone, Zach turned to her. "They were looking for you." She nodded. "Yes." He didn't say more, but something had shifted. That night, while he read by the fire and she sat staring into her tea, Laura made a decision. She could not keep hiding. Not here. Not with him. He had given her truth. She owed him the same. Tomorrow she would tell him everything. The morning after the strangers on the motorcycles had come and gone, the silence between Laura and Zach was unlike the silence they had shared before. It was not the easy stillness of people who had learned to coexist without speaking. It was a silence wrapped in tension, fraying at the edges, weighted by things unsaid. Zach had said nothing more about the photograph or the reward. Laura, for her part, had not yet found the courage to tell him the truth. She rose early as usual and helped with the morning chores, but her movements were slower, her eyes distracted. The peaceful rhythm they had built over the past week had been pierced. Zach worked with quiet efficiency, fixing a broken fence post and rebalancing the compost barrel. But his responses to her questions were short, his gaze often turned elsewhere. She knew she had hurt him, not through any single action, but by allowing a version of herself to remain hidden from someone who had shown her so much of his own brokenness. What they had built, fragile as it was, could not hold without honesty. After lunch, while he rested in the shade with a book, Laura walked alone through the garden, the grass warm beneath her feet. The memory of the photograph still burned in her chest. She could no longer pretend she had come to this place by accident. She had fled from something, from someone, and now her past was catching up. But before it reached her fully, she would face it. She turned and walked back to the porch where Zach sat with one leg stretched over the other, a pencil in hand, sketching something quietly in a notebook. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked up, gaze unreadable. "I should have told you earlier. I wanted to, but I was afraid." He said nothing, only closed the notebook and waited. "My full name is Laura Whitman. I'm the CEO of Whitman Organics." His face didn't change. "I was supposed to marry Richard Blake," she continued, "the man from the photograph. He's the head of Blake Media. Our wedding was going to be a public merger of sorts, corporate and personal. But I found out he was using me. Everything he said, everything we built, it was a lie. I left that night, during a party we were hosting, to announce the merger." She paused, searching his expression. "When you found me, I had just run. I didn't know where I was going. I turned off my phone, left everything behind. I didn't tell you because, at first, I was scared. Then later, I didn't want it to change the way you saw me." Zach leaned back slowly, his arms folding across his chest. "I figured you were running," he said finally, "but I didn't think you were hiding." "I wasn't hiding from you," she said quickly. "I was hiding from what I had become." He looked out at the hills in the distance, jaw tight. "What else haven't you told me?" Laura hesitated. "The company you mentioned, New Light, the one that collapsed, Richard was involved in it, quietly behind the scenes. His media company had invested in the developers. He was one of the men who signed off on the budget cuts." Zach's gaze sharpened. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I found the documents after I got back to the city. I wanted to make it right. I gathered everything, turned it over to the Attorney General's office. They're investigating him now." "And you?" he asked. "What happens to you in all of this?" "I'm not going back," she said. "I've already stepped down from my position. I refuse the merger. I've started a legal fund to support victims of corporate negligence. Your name is already on the list. You'll be contacted. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." He stood abruptly and walked away from the porch, his boots crunching across the gravel path. Laura followed but kept her distance. He stopped near the garden fence, staring down at the rows of vegetables they had planted together. "I let you in," he said, not turning. "I haven't done that in years." "I know," she whispered. "And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I just needed you to know the truth. All of it." He didn't speak, and she didn't press him further. That night she packed her things. She folded the borrowed clothes, cleaned the guest room, and left the quilt neatly folded at the end of the bed. She wrote him a note, thanking him for his kindness, his strength, and the space he had given her to remember who she was. Then she walked out the door and didn't look back. 2 days later, the rain came again. Not a storm, but a steady, soaking downpour that threatened to flood the lower fields and cut off the small dirt road into the village. Zach worked through the morning, hauling sandbags, reinforcing the edge of the pasture. His muscles ached. His mind wouldn't quiet. He hadn't slept well since she left. Late in the afternoon, he heard the unmistakable sound of rotors. He looked up to see a helicopter descending slowly in the clearing beyond the trees. A red cross was painted on the side. Emergency response. She stepped out before the blades had even stopped spinning. Laura wore heavy boots and a waterproof jacket, her hair pulled back beneath a cap. She didn't hesitate. Behind her came boxes of medical supplies, dry food, blankets. Volunteers followed with clipboards and water jugs. He watched from a distance as she organized people, handed out materials, gave clear instructions to the small group of locals who had come to help. She moved with purpose, her face calm, her voice strong. She wasn't the woman who had run from the city in a designer dress. She was something else entirely now, someone real. She saw him and crossed the muddy path without a word. They met in the space between words and explanations, and for a moment neither spoke. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, "only to help. You shouldn't have come alone. It's still dangerous out here." "I'm not alone, and I'm not afraid." He studied her, the lines of her face more defined than before, eyes clearer. You've changed. I remembered who I was, she said, and I owe that to you. Later that night, after the rain had eased and the volunteers had returned to their tents, Zach found her near the fire, rubbing warmth into her hands. I saw the news, he said. About the fund, about the charges. She nodded. It's only a beginning, but I had to start somewhere. He sat beside her. I built this place to keep the world out, he said, but maybe that was the wrong direction. She looked at him, her breath catching. I want to build something again, he continued. Not just for me, for the people here, for the ones who can't afford architects or permits or city help, a school, a workshop, a way forward. She reached out and took his hand. Let's do it together. In the months that followed, the land transformed. What was once a lonely cabin became the heart of a growing project. With Laura's connections and Zach's designs, they built a small school for sustainable building techniques. Young people came from across the state to learn. Locals were hired, trained, paid fairly. The field where she had once gathered eggs now held greenhouses and workshops. A small manufacturing shed was added, where local herbs and oils were used to produce a new line of skin care. Organic, honest, community-owned. They were partners in every way, in work, in vision, in life. On a crisp morning in early fall, Zach stood beneath the oak tree behind the cabin, adjusting the collar of a simple linen shirt. Friends and neighbors gathered, some sitting on hay bales, others standing with cups of cider in hand. Laura stepped through the garden, a garland of wildflowers in her hair, her smile lit from within. There were no photographers, no press releases, only a promise, spoken softly between two people who had already lived through the storm and found each other on the other side. After the small ceremony, they walked to the edge of the school grounds, where a brass plaque had been fixed to the cornerstone of the first building. It read, "In memory of what was lost, in hope for what we build together." Zach turned to her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Welcome home." Laura leaned into him, her voice steady. "I never really left." Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Watch our next videos and explore others on the channel. And if you enjoyed this one, share it with someone who needs a good story today.